The morning water is still cool against your wrist, and the rim of the vat has kept the night inside its plastered stone, so that when you lean over it, the air rising from the soaked leaves feels green and faintly sour and soft. The yard is not fully awake yet, though a bullock has shifted in its rope harness near the press, and somewhere beyond the wall, a cook fire has begun to breathe a thin line of smoke into the pale sky. You stand with the shallow skimming bowl in one hand and a strip of damp cloth in the other, waiting for the surface to tell you what it needs. The vat is half shadow and half sky, a round basin sunk into the earth, its inner wall rubbed smooth by years of water, plant sap, elbows, bamboo poles, and the careful feet of men who know where the plaster is firm. Around you, the indigo yard rests in that hour before full heat, when the dust is settled, and the stone still remembers the coolness of night. The cut plants lie close by in loose heaps, their small leaves darkened from yesterday's soaking, their stems bent and slippery, and the smell is not floral or sweet, but leafy, damp, earthy, and honest. You have skimmed this vat often enough to know that the work begins before the work seems to begin, while the water is still carrying its hidden color, before blue appears in any proud or visible way. A stranger might look down and see only murky yellow-green liquor, a kind of field water made tired by crushed leaves. But you've learned to notice the film at the edges, the floating threads, the little islands of foam that gather when the liquor is disturbed. Your task is patient and plain, to keep the surface clean, to watch the change, and to help the vat breathe without hurrying it. This is a Mughal indigo yard, somewhere in the broad country where Bayana, Agra, Kol, Mewat, and Sarkej are names spoken by merchants with care, because some blues travel farther than others. The men who keep accounts may speak of mounds, sir, biggers, duties, advances, and caravan loads. But here beside the vat, the measure is simpler and nearer to the body. You know the day by the weight of the skimmer, by the heat of plaster under bare feet, by the smell of fermentation rising gently from the water. The plant has already been brought in from the field, cut before it grew too woody, when the leaves still held the possibility of color in their green flesh. It arrived in bundles tied with cord or twisted grass, carried on heads, backs, carts, or by bullocks that moved slowly through morning lanes while dust clung to their legs. The cutters had worked in the damp hours, their hands smelling of sap, while you waited in the yard where the vats opened like low moons in the earth. The first men placed the stems and leaves in the steeping tank, a rectangular pit when the yard followed the two-vat way, or a broad circular basin when the old single-vat method was used. Stones were laid over the plant to keep it down, because indigo leaves like to rise, and the water must cover them if the hidden matter is to loosen. You watched the bundles sink slowly, the surface closing over them with a sound like cloth being lowered into a washing trough, and the day began its quiet counting. The steeping took its own time, sometimes through a full night, and sometimes longer, depending on the season, the freshness of the cut plant, and the judgment of those who had watched many vats before you. Warm weather made the liquor change quickly, while cooler air asked for patience, and no man with sense argued too loudly with water, leaves, and heat. The master of the yard might come by and touch the surface, rub a little liquor between finger and thumb, smell it, and say very little, because experience often speaks in small sounds. By the time you arrive to skim, the leaves have given up much of what they can offer, and the liquor has begun to carry the pale, living substance that will become blue only after air has done its part. It is strange, if you think of it too directly, that one of the world's deepest colors begins as something almost uncertain, a yellowish water with a green cast, and a smell of wet fields after rain. But you do not need wonder to make it work, only the slow attention that turns each repeated gesture into knowledge. Your skimmer is not a fine tool, though it suits the hand very well. A shallow bowl or broad scoop worn smooth at the lip, sometimes metal, sometimes shaped wood, sometimes a basket-like strainer when the floating matter is coarse. The handle has darkened with oil from palms and from the yard itself, and its balance tells you where to hold it before you have looked. You lower it lightly, almost sideways, taking only what rests above the liquor, because good work here means removing what must go and leaving the useful body of the vat behind. On the surface, there are bits of broken leaf, pale fibers, loosened stem skin, dust, and the faint scum that comes when plants, water, warmth, and time have been left together. You draw the skimmer toward you in a slow arc, lift, tilt, and let the clear liquor fall back through the edge while the unwanted matter gathers in the bowl. Nothing about it is grand, but the repetition steadies the morning, and after many passes the vat seems to become more open. Around you the yard begins to move, though never all at once, because old work wakes by degrees. One man rinses a cloth in a low trough, another checks the stones that held down yesterday's steeping, and two younger workers carry a basket of spent stalks toward the drying place, where such refuse may later serve some smaller purpose. A clerk sits near the shade with a reed, pen, and paper, but even his scratching is soft, nearly lost beneath the wet slap of plants and the dull knock of a bamboo pole against stone. The air thickens as the sun lifts, and the vat changes its smell, becoming less like a fresh-cut field and more like a warm pond hidden under leaves. You do not mind it, because the odor belongs to the work in the same way smoke belongs to a kiln, or oil belongs to a press. It clings to your clothes and settles in your hair, and by evening even your hands will carry the green memory of the morning. In the Mughal towns, people speak of indigo as a thing of trade, a dye wrapped in cloth, shaped into cakes, weighed, counted, sealed, carried, bargained over, and sent along roads where caravans creak under bales and jars. In the yard, before it becomes commerce, it is simply wet labor, warm stone, plant matter, patience, and a row of men whose names may never be written anywhere. You are one of them, and the color passes through your day so quietly that it feels less like wealth than weather. When the steeped liquor is ready, it must leave the first tank and move to the beating vat, which often sits lower in the yard, so gravity can do part of the carrying. A plug is loosened, a small channel opened, or a hole in the plastered side is cleared, and the liquor runs out with a hush that gathers speed, bringing with it the pale dissolved promise of blue. You stand near the receiving vat, skimmer ready, because movement wakes the surface, and floating pieces arrive with the flow. The circular vat below receives the liquor in widening ripples, and the men who will beat and stir it step down carefully, their legs disappearing into the greenish water. They move with staves, with arms, with broad paddles, and with the whole patient rhythm of bodies trained to repeat effort without anger. The water slaps, folds, and opens to the air, and your skimmer begins its work again, collecting foam, fragments, and whatever might trouble the settling that comes later. This beating is not violence, though the word can sound hard, because here it means stirring air into the liquor until the hidden dye begins to take form. The men push and pull their staves as though mixing a thick batter, and sometimes a little oil is added, enough to soften the froth and help the surface behave. You watch where the bubbles gather, where scum drifts toward the shaded rim, and where the liquor changes from greenish yellow towards something deeper, duller, and more blue. The change is slow enough to be restful, and yet clear enough that anyone who has watched it many times feels a quiet satisfaction when it begins. The liquor darkens not by command, but by contact with air, as the dissolved matter becomes particles too heavy to remain held in the water. You do not call this chemistry, because that is not the language of your yard, but your hands know the same truth through practice. A child bringing water might pause near the wall and look down at the vat, trying to see the blue appear as though it were a fish rising from below. You might smile without saying much, because the color is not a sudden guest, but a settling, a thickening, a decision made by many small changes at once. The surface carries hints first, then streaks, then a dull bloom in the foam, and your skimmer moves through it with care. The foam itself is not all waste, and that is why the work asks for judgment rather than only movement. Some froth is airy and empty, some carries leaf dirt, and some is stained with the very color you are helping coax from the vat. So you learn to lift lightly and let the good liquor slip back. The bowl rises, the wrist turns, the edge drains, and every pass is a small agreement between taking and leaving. Your feet know the safe places around the vat, where the plaster is firm, where water has made the clay slippery, and where the rim has been chipped by years of tools. Sometimes you brace one foot against a low stone, bend from the hips, and skim along the far curve with the handle extended, feeling the surface rather than fully seeing it. The sun warms your back while the vat breathes up at your face, and the day becomes a circle of motion. Beyond the yard, the world of the Mughal road is beginning as well, though it reaches you only as distant sound. A cartwheel complains, a donkey shakes its harness bells, a trader speaks to someone near the gate, and a woman passing with brass pots walks steadily enough that the water inside them barely trembles. The indigo yard remains enclosed, held by its walls, its vats, its shade, and the damp smell of work. In some seasons, the fields nearby are green with the very plants whose leaves now lie exhausted in the tank. Indigo does not shout its color while it grows, and a traveler might pass the crop without guessing that such a deep blue could hide in those modest leaves. You have seen them under rain, under dust, under the white glare of afternoon, and now you see them after their giving, limp and brownish, their strength loosened into water. The men who cut the crop know another part of the labor, with sickles flashing low and bundles tied before the sun grows harsh. The men who carry know the weight of wet leaves, and the men who stir know the ache that comes across shoulders after hours of pushing staves through heavy liquor. Your own work is lighter in one way and more watchful in another, because a skimmer must notice what gathers at the edge, what floats, what changes, and what returns. You are not a master dyer, not a merchant, not a clerk with ink-stained fingers and a folded account book, though your place belongs to the making as surely as theirs. Without the hands at the vat, the dye would remain only a possibility, scattered in leaves and water, never gathered into the cakes that travel. The world remembers names that sign papers, but color is often made by those who keep their eyes on the surface. As the beating continues, the vat grows louder for a while, though even this noise has rhythm rather than alarm. Staves enter the liquor and rise again. Arms move forward and back. Water breaks against plaster and folds over itself, and the foam gathers where the current carries it. You skim at the rim, working with the movement instead of against it, because every yard teaches that resistance wastes strength. A little oil spreads in thin shining eyes across the water, catching the morning light in brief pale flashes before the stirring breaks it apart. The oil does not belong in great quantity, only in a modest touch, like a cook's judgment or a potter's added slip, and older hands watch to see whether the froth loosens as it should. You draw away the thickened scum where it collects, and the liquor beneath seems smoother, darker, and more settled. The yard has tools for every stage, and each tool carries the mark of repeated use. Stones that press leaves are slick on one side and dusty on the other. Baskets are stained at their bases. Cloths hold pale blue ghosts in their weave, and the channels between vats are rubbed clean by passing water. Your skimmer, hanging at night from a peg, looks ordinary, but in the morning it becomes an extension of your hand. There is food in the day, though it comes simply and without ceremony, perhaps flat bread wrapped in cloth, a little onion, lentils if the household has cooked enough, and water from a pot kept in the shade. You eat near the wall when there is a pause, sitting with knees drawn up, watching flies settle and lift from the damp earth. The taste of bread is plain, but after the vat smell it feels grounding, dry, warm, and human. Men speak quietly while they eat, not because silence is required, but because heat and work make speech economical. Someone mentions a cousin in a weaving town, someone else speaks of a tax collector's arrival, and an older worker recalls a year when rain came late and the leaves seemed too thin. Their words move around the practical edges of life, touching weather, wages, grain, children, animals, and the condition of the vats. The Mughal world beyond the yard is vast, full of courtly carpets, imperial farmans, garden pavilions, painted manuscripts, forts, mosques, temples, markets, and roads. But your day is held inside one narrow craft. You may never see the cloth that takes this blue, or the merchant who praises its depth, or the far buyer who turns a cake in his hand beneath another country's sky. Still, the blue begins here, in water that stains the cuticles, under fingernails, along the creases of palms, and into the small cracks of skin. After food, the vat asks for attention again, because settling begins only when movement has done enough. The men climb out carefully, water streaming from their legs, and the surface gradually calms. Those small bubbles continue to rise and break as if the vat is thinking in its sleep. You skim once more along the rim, removing what the beating has brought upward, and then you wait for the heavy matter to fall. Waiting is part of the job in ways that impatient people never quite understand. You do not abandon the vat when nothing seems to happen, because the clearest work of indigo often takes place beneath the surface, where particles gather and descend into the lower hollow. The top water slowly lightens, the bottom keeps what is valuable, and your task becomes a form of watching. You notice small signs as the afternoon lengthens, because the yard has taught your eyes to read what others overlook. The color of the water near the rim, the smell after stirring has stopped, the kind of residue on the skimmer's lip, and the way foam clings or breaks all tell you something. This knowledge is not written in a book, but carried in the wrist, the nose, the back, and the memory of many days. Sometimes the master comes and asks what you see, though he may already have formed his own answer. You tell him the foam has thinned, or that the water clears slowly, or that the plant was heavy with leaf and gave well, and he listens with the half attention of a man who trusts ordinary competence. In such small exchanges, the yard holds together, not through grand instruction, but through familiar noticing. When the clear water above the settled dye is ready to be drawn off, the vat becomes delicate again. Open too soon, and colour is lost. Wait too long in heat, and the liquor may sour in ways that trouble the quality. So the plug is eased, the upper water escapes through a side opening or is lifted out carefully, and the blue sediment remains below like a soft mud gathered by time. You stand near with your skimmer and cloth, because draining can disturb what has settled, and small floating pieces may appear again as the water level falls. The sound changes as the vat empties, first broad and quiet, then narrower, closer, and more hollow against the plaster. A damp blue line marks where the water had rested, and below it, the remaining substance looks darker, thicker, and more still. This wet indigo is not yet the hard cake a merchant can weigh in his hand. It is paste, soft and heavy, a concentrated earth of colour that must be lifted, strained, dried, shaped, and protected from too much sun and wind. You help clear the surface, pass cloth, rinse tools, and keep stray grit away, because every small impurity becomes part of the final cake if no one stops it. The paste may be gathered from the lower bowl-like hollow at the bottom of the vat, where the heaviest matter has collected after the water is gone. Men scoop it with hands, shallow vessels, or curved tools, and the first lift has a strange softness, as though the sky itself had been pressed into wet clay. It stains everything it touches, but not brightly at first, rather with a dark, reserved blue that deepens as it meets the air. Cloth is spread on the ground or over a prepared surface, and the paste is laid there so extra water can seep away. The cloth drinks slowly, the earth beneath accepts what passes through, and the indigo thickens from a flowing mass into something that can be handled. You smooth an edge, fold a corner, rinse the skimmer again, and feel the day becoming more finished. There is a careful plainness to this part, because the beauty of the final colour depends on steps that do not look beautiful while they are happening. Wet cloth, stained hands, muddy feet, drained water, baskets of exhausted leaves, and a yard full of damp smell are the visible companions of a dye that will later seem almost noble. Work often hides its grace until the very end, and sometimes even then the grace belongs more to the doing than the product. When the paste is firm enough, it may be shaped by hand into balls, lumps, half-egg forms, or cakes, depending on local habit and the desire of those who trade it. Fingers press, palms roll, edges are pinched, and each piece takes a modest form that will dry lighter on the outside than within. In some places cakes are flattened, in others rounded, but all carry the quiet pressure of hands. The drying place smells different from the vat, less sour and more mineral, as though the wet colour has begun turning into a small, stored silence. Cakes lie on sand, cloth, boards or prepared ground, watched so they do not crack too quickly, gather dirt, or lose more moisture than is useful. The sun is both helper and troublemaker, generous when mild, harsh when high, and you learn to respect its temper. By late afternoon the yard has several kinds of blue within it, though none are the shining blue of fresh dyed cloth. There is the black blue paste in the low vessels, the dull blue stain on cloth, the grey-blue crust on tools, and the pale blue dust beginning to bloom where yesterday's cakes have dried. The colour seems quieter in the yard than in the market, as though it saves its true voice for cotton, silk, or thread. You rinse your skimmer in a trough where the water is already cloudy from many rinsings. A clean tool is never entirely clean in an indigo yard, because blue enters grain, seam, nail, and pore, and even when the surface looks plain, a trace remains. You rub the lip with cloth, check for clinging bits of leaf, and hang it where morning will find it ready. The spent leaves are carried away, heavy and dull, no longer the bright crop that came from the field. They may steam slightly in a heap, and their smell is strong enough that newcomers wrinkle their noses, though workers pass without comment. Every process has what it leaves behind, and in this yard the refuse is green-brown, fibrous, warm, and part of the same cycle as the cakes. Evening lowers itself slowly over the vats, and the plastered rims lose the glare they held at noon. Shadows gather inside the empty tank, making it look deeper than it is, while the surface stains on the wall show the memory of many fillings and drainings. You sweep loose leaves from the edge with a small reed broom, and the sound is gentle against the stone. The clerk closes his account book when the day's measures have been noted, though the numbers he writes cannot hold everything that happened. They do not show how the liquor smelled when it was just ready, how the foam behaved, how the sun changed the drying cloth, or how carefully a worker skimmed one stubborn corner. Records keep trade moving, but the body keeps the craft alive. You might walk home with blue under your nails, a faint ache in your back, and the day's warmth stored in your shoulders. The road passes fields, wells, courtyards, and low houses where evening meals are beginning, and perhaps someone knows by your hands where you have been. Indigo is difficult to hide from the skin, but there is no need to hide it, because it is simply the mark of work. At home, water may take away the sourness, but not the color entirely. You wash, rub, rinse, and still a shadow remains along the fingers, as though the vat has left a small piece of itself with you until tomorrow. The meal is plain and welcome, and when you sit near the doorway, the evening air feels wide after the close, damp breath of the yard. Sleep comes differently after vat work, because the mind repeats the motion even when the hands are still. You may feel again the skimmer entering the surface, the wrist turning, the liquor draining back, and the faint pull of foam gathering at the bowl's edge. This is not troubling, only the day settling into the body the way a song settles after it has been sung many times. And before dawn, while the town is still wrapped in its own breathing, another load of cut indigo may already be waiting near the yard gate. The vats will cool, the stones will be checked, the water will be drawn, and the same gestures will begin again with small differences only workers notice. A craft like this does not repeat because nothing changes, but because change comes quietly within repetition. Leaf by leaf, vat by vat, morning by morning. The next morning does not feel like a new beginning so much as the same long thread being taken up again, damp at the end and familiar between the fingers. Before the sun has cleared the roofs, you are already inside the yard, where the vats sit in their low silence, holding yesterday's stains and today's waiting water. A man with a rope bucket draws from the well, and each pour into the steeping tank sounds round and hollow at first, then flatter as the basin fills. The cup plants arrive before the heat comes fully into the air, because leaves keep their strength better when they are not left too long in carts. The bundles smell sharp from the field, and where the stems have been cut, pale sap beads at the ends like tiny dull pearls. You help loosen the ties and spread the plants evenly, not because it is difficult work, but because uneven soaking can leave one part spent and another part stubbornly green. The stones are laid over the floating mass with care, each one lowered by hand rather than thrown, so the stems sink without splashing too much water over the rim. A careless movement wastes water, bruises plaster, and shows disrespect for a place where everything depends on holding what is meant to be held. When the last stone settles and the leaves disappear beneath the surface, the tank looks calm again, though beneath that calm, a slow loosening has begun. There are yards where the master keeps a little shade over the steeping tank, a woven screen or matting arranged to soften the day's glare. There are others where the sun falls plainly on the water, and the workers judge the steeping by smell, color, warmth, and habit. adjusting not with written measures, but with remembered seasons. In the time of the Mughal emperors, this kind of knowledge moves through households, workshops, and fields in a quiet way, from older hands to younger hands, rarely praised and often trusted. You have heard merchants speak of the finest indigo as though it belongs first to markets, to caravanserais, to river crossings, to ships, and to the fingers of men who break cakes and inspect the grain. But before any of that, it belongs to this low morning where someone must lift leaf scum from water and someone must feel whether the liquor has changed enough. Trade may stretch across long distances, but the work begins with a wrist leaning over a vat. By mid-morning, the older steeping from the previous day is ready to test, and the master calls for one corner to be cleared. The stones are lifted away slick and dark, and the top leaves shift upward as though waking from a heavy sleep. You step close with the skimmer, because when the plant mass is disturbed, small pieces rise and drift, and the surface needs steadying before the liquor is drawn off. The liquid below is not beautiful yet, and that is part of the patience this work teaches. It is cloudy, warm, and faintly yellow, with a greenish cast that catches the light only when the surface trembles. You look at it as someone else might look at a loaf before baking, a field before harvest, or a pot before firing, because the finished thing is not absent, only not yet visible. When the channel is opened, the steeped liquor flows from the upper tank toward the lower beating vat, carrying small fragments despite the care taken with screens and settling. You move beside the runnel and lift away stray leaves before they can gather in the receiving basin, your hand following the water's pace without hurry. The stream glints in the morning light, dull at first, then brighter where it thins over plaster, and for a moment it seems like ordinary water, wearing a secret. The beating vat fills with a low, spreading sound, and the men who will stir it wait until the level is right. They tie up their garments, step down by the worn footholds, and take their places with the practiced spacing of people who have done this without needing many words. One man begins, another follows, and soon the surface folds and opens, pulling air into the liquor in a rhythm that belongs to labor rather than music. You stand at the rim and watch the first foam form, pale and uncertain, gathering where the staves push the liquid against the wall. At first it is light, almost clean-looking, but then it takes on color from the vat's contents, streaked by fragments and darkened by the work of air. Your skimmer slips beneath the thicker patches, lifts, tilts, and lets what should return slide back in a slow fall. The men in the vat do not speak much while they beat, because the arms must keep their pace, and breath must go where work requires it. Their shoulders shine with water, their feet feel for balance on the slick floor, and the staves pull against the liquor with a soft resistance that changes as the mixture thickens. The sound is steady enough that after a while it seems to fold into the morning itself, like grinding grain, turning wheels, or the repeated pull of a loom. In a court painting, if someone had cared to paint this yard, the blue might have been shown as a bright square of color, clean and finished on a merchant's cloth. But the true making is wetter, muddier, slower, and more ordinary than such a picture would suggest, and that ordinariness gives it a dignity of its own. You know the color not as a jewel, but as foam on your knuckles and a dull stain in the creases of your hand. The Mughal officials who record revenue may think of indigo as one crop among many, set beside wheat, barley, cotton, sugarcane, and other things that fill ledgers and support households. In some districts it is valuable enough to draw special attention, and in some years its price may please the grower or trouble the buyer, depending on harvest, demand, and the safety of roads. Yet none of that makes the foam rise faster, and none of it changes how carefully you skim the edge. By now the liquor has darkened, and the first true blue shows itself not in a burst, but in a deepening shadow beneath the foam. The staves lift and drop, the surface opens, and the air does its patient work, making visible what the plant had carried invisibly in its leaves. You watch the change the way a potter watches a drying vessel, not staring with excitement, but returning your eyes again and again to the places where change is most honest. At times the foam grows too lively, and the master asks for a little oil to be brought. A few drops spread outward in tender circles, each one catching light before breaking apart under the movement of staves. The froth softens and lies flatter, and you skim away the heavier scum with an easy motion, grateful for the way small remedies can make difficult work gentle again. The yard's walls keep out some dust, though never all of it, because every working place shares air with roads, animals, shoes, carts, and the open world. Dust settles on shoulders, on drying cakes, on baskets, and on the rim of the vat, and part of your day is simply keeping it from going where it should not. You pass the damp cloth along the stone lip, wiping a crescent clean before leaning over to gather another slow line of foam. A younger boy watches you from near the water pots, trying to learn when the skimmer should enter and when it should wait. He wants a rule he can keep in his head, but you know that rules in vat work are softened by heat, by the age of the plant, by how long the leaves travelled after cutting, and by the temperament of the day itself. So you show him, without making a speech, placing the lip of the bowl just under the surface, lifting only what floats, and letting him see the useful liquor fall back. Teaching in such a yard happens by nearness, not by grand instruction. A boy carries water, rinses cloth, gathers leaves, watches the older men, and slowly discovers that every motion has a reason, though no one has paused to name each reason aloud. If he is patient, his hands will learn before his mouth can explain, and one day he will know by smell when a vat is becoming ready. The heat gathers toward noon, and the wetness of the work no longer feels cool. Steam does not rise exactly, but warmth does, carrying plant odor, sourness, oil, wet plaster, and the faint metallic smell of tools that have been rinsed many times. You shade your eyes with the back of your wrist, then return to the rim, because the vat does not pause just because the sun has grown strong. The men beating the liquor change places when arms tire, and those who climb out leave blue-green water running down their calves. Another pair steps in, taking up the rhythm without ceremony, and the surface continues its slow folding as though the vat itself had not noticed the change. Such work depends on shared timing, on knowing when to yield a place and when to take it, and this, too, belongs to the quiet order of the day. There may be a well nearby, lined with stone, its pulley creaking faintly whenever water is drawn for rinsing, steeping, or cooling hands. The bucket comes up dark and dripping, and the first splash into a jar sends a little earthy smell into the heat. You drink from a cup that many hands have used, and the water tastes of rope, clay, and relief, which is often the best taste water can have. Sometimes, in the shade near the wall, there are scraps of talk about cloth and color. A dyer from a town nearby may say that indigo takes differently to cotton than to silk, and that a good blue depends not only on the cake, but on patient dipping, airing, and repeating. You listen while cleaning your skimmer, understanding that your work is one quiet step in a longer chain of hands. The chain reaches from the seed sown in tilled earth to the cutter's sickle, from the water carrier's bucket to the vat beater's shoulders, from the skimmer's wrist to the dryer's cloth, and later from the dyer's tub to the washer's stone. It reaches farther still, to weavers, traders, moneylenders, brokers, scribes, and buyers, who may never know what the first morning smelled like. Yet the color remembers, in its own silent way, the damp leaves, the beating, the settling, and the patient skim. When the beating has gone on long enough, the master signals for the staves to slow, and the sound of the vat loosens into smaller splashes. The men take a few more turns, less from need than from habit, then lift their tools and let the liquor move by itself. The surface, once broken and lively, begins to calm, and you take your place again with the bowl, gathering what remains where currents push it aside. This is one of the quieter parts of the day. Though it asks for care, too much fussing would disturb the settling, but neglect would let unwanted matter dry along the rim, or sink where it should not. So you skim slowly, in widening passes, moving around the vat as the surface loses its restlessness and the suspended blue begins its descent through the water. The sun now stands high enough to brighten the inner wall of the vat, and the settling liquor shows different colors at different depths. Near the top it grows clearer, a pale amber green with a faint coolness in it, while below, where the light thickens, the blue is gathering in a darker body. You look down and feel, not excitement exactly, but the quiet comfort of a process keeping its promise. In the shade, the spent leaves from the steeping tank are forked or lifted out and piled in baskets. They are heavier than they look, because water hides in stems and clings to torn leaves, and the men who carry them walk with knees slightly bent. A trail of drops follows them across the yard, darkening the dust one mark at a time, until the heap receives its own exhausted harvest. Those spent leaves have given their hidden color and now seem plain, but even plain remains useful in a working place. They may be left to rot, mixed with earth, or taken away for purposes too small to interest a merchant, because nothing in such a yard is simply gone when its first task is over. The old plants return slowly to soil, and the next crop grows from ground that has known labor before. Afternoon is the hour when shadows become tools of their own. A mat is shifted to shade the drying cakes, a basket is moved away from glare, and cloths are turned so water leaves evenly rather than too fast at one edge. You carry your skimmer to the trough again and rinse it, watching blue threads curl into the rinse water like smoke seen through glass. The dye paste from an earlier vat is being shaped nearby, and you can hear the soft slap of wet material against a board. A man presses each lump with his palm, smooths the sides, and sets it with the others in a row that is never perfectly straight, though the regularity pleases the eye. The pieces look modest, almost dull, yet within them lies a blue that will later travel farther than any worker in the yard may walk. Cakes must dry with patience, because hurry can crack them, spoil their texture, or make them poor in the judgment of buyers who know how to break and inspect a piece. Their outer skins change first, taking on a dusty bloom, while the inner body remains damp and dark for longer. Someone turns them when it is time, and the touch must be firm enough to move them, but gentle enough to keep the shape whole. The drying rows are watched almost the way bread is watched near an oven, with an attention that understands both time and weather. If clouds gather, cloth may be brought closer. If the sun grows harsh, shade is drawn. If dust rises, a worker shields the cakes as well as he can. Each adjustment is small, but a day made of small adjustments can preserve the value of many hands. You return to the settling vat and find the upper water clearer than before. The blue has sunk further, resting now like a soft secret at the bottom, and the surface carries only a few last stray specks. You skim them with a light touch, barely disturbing the water, and for a while the whole yard seems to hold its breath around the stillness. There are moments in this job when doing almost nothing is the proper work. You stand, observe, adjust your footing, look at the rim, look at the light, and let the process finish what it has been doing since morning. Some people value only visible effort, but a vat skimmer knows that care can be quiet, and that a patient eye may save as much as a strong arm. The master bends down and dips a small cup into the clearer upper liquor, lifting it to judge the color against the light. He pours it back slowly, watches how it falls, and nods just enough for the others to understand that draining may soon begin. No one hurries at the signal, because even readiness asks to be approached with respect. A plug is eased from the lower side, not from the very bottom where the blue paste waits, but from a point meant to let the clearer water leave first. The water slips out through the opening and runs along a shallow channel, carrying almost no visible wealth, though a worker still watches it with concern. You stand with your skimmer at the inner edge, removing what the falling level loosens from the wall, keeping the draining surface clean. As the water lowers, rings appear on the plaster, each one a small record of where the vat had held its height. Some rings are fresh and wet, some are old stains from past days, and some have become part of the vat's face, impossible to scrub away. A working vessel keeps memory in such marks, just as a hand keeps memory in callus, scar, and stain. When the last, useful water has gone, the bottom of the vat reveals the blue sediment, thick, wet, and slightly shining in the afternoon light. Men step in carefully now, not to beat, but to gather, and their feet avoid stirring grit from places where it might mix with the paste. The first scoop lifts heavily, and the mass folds over itself with the slow softness of river clay after rain. You help hold the cloth where the paste will be laid, keeping its corners from slipping and smoothing wrinkles that could trap too much water. The blue weight spreads outward, darker in the middle and lighter at the edges, and drops begin to seep through into the vessel below. This is not the part of the craft that songs remember, but it is the part that makes the later shape possible. Your fingers press the cloth gently, not squeezing too hard, only encouraging the water to leave at a pace that suits the paste. Too much pressure might force fine matter through, too little would leave the mass wet for too long. The cloth darkens under your hands, and its weave appears and disappears beneath the blue, like a small net holding sky. A fly lands on the edge and lifts away quickly, perhaps troubled by the smell or by the dampness. You notice it, because vat work teaches noticing, and then your eyes return to the cloth, the drainage, the gathered paste, the men rinsing their legs nearby. No event is large, and yet the day is full, filled with small movements laid one beside another until evening. The boy who watched you earlier brings another cloth, and this time you let him hold one corner. His grip is too tense at first, pulling the fabric unevenly, and you correct him by shifting his wrist rather than scolding. He looks down, nods, and relaxes his hand, learning that even holding a cloth has a right amount of force. It may take years to know a craft well, but years are made from such corrections, from little pressures felt through the palm and remembered later without words. A yard can teach a person to move neither too strongly nor too weakly, neither too fast nor too slowly, but with attention fitted to the matter at hand. The vat, the cloth, the skimmer, and the drying cake each ask for a different kind of patience. Toward late day, the heat begins to leave the plastered stones, and the air over the yard softens. The shadows of baskets and tools stretch longer across the ground, while the drying cakes sit quietly in their rows, losing moisture by degrees. You gather stray leaves from the rim of the steeping tank, and the smell there is stronger now, because another batch is beginning its own slow turning. A worker covers part of the tank with a mat, weighing the edge with a brick to keep it from lifting in the evening breeze. The water beneath will continue changing after the yard grows quiet, and by dawn it may be ready for drawing, beating, skimming, settling, and all the gestures that return. This is one comfort of the work, that the night does not stop it, but carries it gently forward in darkness. In the distance, the call of a vendor fades along the road, and somewhere a metal vessel is struck clean after cooking. The yard itself answers with softer sounds, water poured from one pot to another, a broom against packed earth, a basket being set down without hurry. Even the animals near the gate seem quieter now, their tails moving lazily while flies search for the last warmth of the day. You hang the skimmer again on its peg, but only after checking the rim with your thumb. A rough place could catch plant fiber tomorrow, and a bit of dried paste could fall into a vat at the wrong time, so the tool receives a final wipe. It is ordinary care, almost invisible, but ordinary care is the thread that keeps a craft from fraying. The master may inspect the drying cakes one last time, turning one over to feel its firmness, breaking none unless there is need. He sees the surface bloom, the edges, the weight, and perhaps he thinks already of how many will fill a basket or how they will be wrapped for sale. You see them differently, as the day's wet labor made still, each piece holding a little of the vat's breath. Before leaving, you rinse your hands, and the water runs pale blue over your knuckles. It pools briefly near your feet, then sinks into the ground, leaving a faint stain that will dry and fade, but not entirely vanish. The yard is full of such half-vanished marks, and walking through it is like walking through many days at once, all layered softly beneath the present one. The gate opens toward the road, where evening has cooled the dust enough for walking. You carry no bundle, only the weight of the day in your shoulders, and the smell of indigo in your clothes, which travels with you as faithfully as a shadow. Behind you, the steeping leaves rest under stones, and beneath their quiet surface, tomorrow's blue is already loosening itself from green. The road home passes beside fields, where the last light lies low across the ridges, and the cut stubble of harvested plots catches gold along its broken ends. In another field, young plants stand close together in the dusk, not yet tall enough for cutting, though already carrying within their leaves the quiet possibility of color. You look at them without stopping because a working person sees both the present task and the next one waiting behind it. The village or town edge settlement does not separate itself from the yard as neatly as a map might suggest. The same hands that lift indigo leaves may also weed grain, mend ropes, carry clay, repair baskets, and stand in line at the well before the stars come out. A craft has its own place, but life moves through many places, and the smell of the vat follows you into courtyards, where children are washing dust from their feet and elders are settling near the doorway. The evening meal is simple, and that is part of its comfort after a day of sour water and plant breath. Bread tears softly between your fingers, lentils hold warmth in their little clay bowl, and an onion, cut roughly, tastes sharper because your tongue has spent the day among leaf and oil. Someone asks whether the vat gave well, and you answer with the kind of answer workers give, neither boasting nor complaining, because the day was the day, and the blue came down. After eating, you may sit a while under the dimming sky, listening to nearby voices loosen as the heat leaves the lane. A potter's wheel has stopped. A loom in one house still knocks gently, and a goat noses at dry straw near the wall. Your hands rest on your knees, palms upward, and even after washing, a faint blue-green shadow stays near the nails, reminding you that some colors enter slowly and leave more slowly. There is a small tiredness in the wrist from skimming, different from the deeper ache of those who beat the vats with staves. It sits near the thumb and along the forearm, a useful tiredness, the kind that tells you the tool was held for many hours, but never with anger. You flex your fingers once, then let them lie still again, and the evening carries the body towards sleep without asking it to explain itself. In the dark, the steeping tank remains awake in its own way. Leaves pressed below water soften and release. The warmth of the day lingers in the plaster, and the stones hold everything down while the yard lies closed and quiet. No lamp need burn beside every vat, because the process has its own patience, and because plant, water, and night know how to continue without being watched. Before dawn, someone will come with a small lamp or with the grey light alone, and the first look into the tank will say whether the soaking has gone far enough. Too early, and the leaves still keep what they should give. Too late, and the liquor may grow coarse, with a smell that warns of neglect. Judgment rests in these narrow spaces, and much of your work belongs to the space between haste and delay. When morning returns, the yard has a damp coolness held close to the ground. The plaster rims are dark with dew, the baskets smell of yesterday's plant matter, and the hanging cloths feel heavy when touched. You arrive quietly, perhaps with bread still warming your stomach, and take the skimmer from its peg as naturally as another person might take a walking staff from beside a door. The master is already leaning over the steeping tank, drawing a little liquor with a cup and letting it fall back in a thin stream. He watches the color against the dawn, sniffs once, rubs a drop between his fingers, and says the brief words that open the next stage. You step closer, because when the stones come off and the leaves rise, the surface will need your hand. The stones are lifted, wet and cold at first, then warming as they are set on the edge. Each one leaves a depression in the packed leaves, and those depressions fill slowly, like footprints in soft mud after rain. As the top layer loosens, little rafts of leaf and stem drift free, and your skimmer enters at once, gathering them before the liquor begins its journey downward. There is an art to removing the first floating refuse without disturbing the rest. You hold the bowl almost flat, let the surface move into it, then raise only a shallow skin of water with the leaves lying on top. The liquor drains back in thin lines from the lip, and what remains in the skimmer is dark, limp, and no longer useful. At the channel, one worker clears the opening with a short rod, and another waits below to see that the flow runs clean. The first release is always watched closely, because bits of compressed plant can rush forward when the pressure changes. You lean near the upper end, removing what gathers at the mouth, while the liquor slips away in a low stream that seems modest for something so valued. The lower vat receives it, and the circular surface widens into trembling rings. In the grey light, the liquid looks almost like tea brewed from leaves left too long, though its smell is green and fermenting with a faint sweetness underneath the sourness. You have smelled it in many moods, and today it seems ready, not too sharp, not too thin, carrying a good body into the beating vat. The workers step down one by one when the level allows, their staves resting upright for a moment, like reeds gathered at the edge of a pond. Then they begin again, pressing air into the liquor, opening it, folding it, stirring from bottom to top, and waking the invisible color with repeated strokes. Their movements are not perfectly matched, but the vat accepts them, blending many arms into one broad rhythm. You move around the rim as they work, always looking for the places where foam thickens and turns heavy. At first, there is little to take, then more, then enough that the skimmer must be emptied often into a side basket or onto waste ground. You lift, tip, rinse, and return, and the sequence becomes so smooth that thinking almost leaves the hand and settles somewhere quieter in the chest. Sunlight reaches the wall, and then the vat itself, brightening the foam so you can see pale yellow, dull green, and the first cooled hints of blue. The change is delicate, and if someone spoke too loudly about it, the speech would feel larger than the event. Better to watch as you do, with the humble attention of a person who knows that color appears by degrees, gathering itself through air. In some years, the merchants want indigo cakes quickly, because a caravan is expected, a riverboat is ready, or a buyer from far away has sent word through agents. In other years, the market is slower, and the yard's pace follows weather and crop more than demand, though money always waits somewhere beyond the gate. Beside the vat, however, urgency remains a poor tool, because stirred liquor, settling dye, and drying paste keep their own time. You have heard of indigo from Bayana being praised for its depth, and of other places known for cakes that break with a certain grain or give a certain strength in dyeing. Such talk travels through markets, and even workers who never enter distant trading houses absorb fragments of it in ordinary conversation. Still, a praised cake and a common cake begin the same way, with plants underwater and someone clearing the surface by hand. A clerk's boy brings a message to the master, folding his cloth away from the wet ground as though afraid the yard will stain even his shadow. He speaks of a trader waiting later in the day, perhaps to inspect the drying lot or discuss the measure of a previous batch. The master nods, half listening, while his eyes remain on the vat, because trade may be waiting, but the liquor must first be right. The beating grows more vigorous for a while, and the surface throws small splashes onto the rim. Drops strike your arm, cool and sticky, and when they dry, they leave pale marks that later deepen. You wipe them without annoyance, because being marked by the vat is no surprise, and a day's work rarely asks permission before entering the skin. A little oil is passed to you in a small vessel, and you hand it to the older worker who knows when to add it. He tilts only a careful amount onto the lively foam, and the surface seems to sigh as the froth loosens and lies flatter. The staves continue, the bubbles break more cleanly, and your skimmer moves with less resistance through the softened scum. This oil is not meant to make the dye, only to help the process behave, and like many small additions in old work, its value lies in restraint. Too much would trouble the vat, too little might leave the foam stubborn, and the proper measure lives in the fingers more than in any marked vessel. The older worker knows by the look of the surface, by the feel of past days, and by that inward counting that skilled hands carry without speaking. When the younger boy asks why the foam has changed, you answer quietly while continuing to work. You tell him that the oil spreads and tames the froth, so the surface clears and the heavier color can later settle as it should. He watches the little shining patches vanish under the movement of staves, and perhaps he will remember the sight more clearly than the words. The vat darkens, the work continues, and by late morning the blue has become more certain beneath the water's moving skin. It is still not bright, not the blue of cloth hung in sunlight, but a dense gathering blue, folded into green and shadow, waiting to descend. You skim the edges where the foam forms a ring, and each pass reveals a smoother surface for a few quiet moments. A bird lands on the wall above the yard, turns its head, and flies away before anyone pays it much attention. The men keep working, because the world is full of small arrivals and departures that do not ask the vat to pause. Dust lifts in the road beyond the gate. A woman calls to a child, and the yard holds its round center of labor. By noon, the body asks for shade, and when the beating slows, everyone feels the relief in shoulders and wrists. The men step out, water streaming from their garments, and the vat's surface continues to tremble after they have stopped, carrying the memory of their movement in widening circles. You wait for those circles to soften, then begin the quieter skimming that belongs to the settling hour. This skimming is almost like smoothing a bed after someone has risen, not because the water must look neat, but because the surface tells the lower particles how calmly they may fall. Any floating leaf, stubborn froth, or disturbed scum has to be removed with enough care that the deeper liquor is left alone. You work slowly, and the vat, having been loud with splashing, becomes a place of listening. The boy brings your food wrapped in cloth, and you sit with your back against the shaded wall. There is bread, a little salt, perhaps a smear of pickle whose sharpness wakes the mouth, and water that has been kept in an earthen pot where evaporation cools it. You eat without leaving the yard, watching the vat from where you sit, because even rest here keeps one eye turned toward work. Across from you, the drying cakes from yesterday have changed overnight. Their surfaces are duller, with a powdery bloom beginning to show, and the edges have tightened slightly as water leaves them. A worker turns each one with practiced fingers, and the blue dust that comes away on his skin looks soft, almost grey, until the light finds it again. A trader arrives while you are still seated, his clothes cleaner than those of the yard workers, though the road has given dust to his sandals. He does not disturb the main work, but stands near the master and looks toward the drying area, with the polite concentration of a man weighing value before touching anything. His eyes are trained differently from yours, drawn to finished texture, break, weight, and sale. You notice his interest, then return to the vat, because the settling has advanced while people spoke. The upper liquor grows clearer, and if you bend close, you can see the difference between the pale water above and the blue substance slowly gathering below. It is a quiet separation, without force or sharp line, and it feels like watching silt settle after a river crossing, only the silt is color. The trader and master discuss quality in soft, practical words, mentioning the strength of the crop, the dryness of the cakes, the timing of the next dispatch, and perhaps the road toward Agra or another market town. Their conversation belongs to the world after the vat, and though you hear it, you do not have to carry it. Your portion is here, at the rim, where a stray thread of plant matter clings to the plaster and must be lifted away. In the Mughal period, great roads and smaller tracks carry goods by cart, pack animal, head load, and riverboat, and indigo joins other products, moving through layers of hands and agreements. Some of it may travel to dyers who serve local markets, and some may move farther, toward ports where overseas traders seek blue cakes with careful eyes. The vat skimmer does not need to imagine every destination, though sometimes the thought passes gently through the mind while the water clears. A cake made from today's vat might one day color a turban, a wrapper, a painted cloth, a tent lining, a thread in a woven border, or some small piece of fabric worn until it fades. It may travel farther than the worker who skimmed it, crossing languages and climates, appearing at last as blue in a place where no one knows the smell of these steeped leaves. There is no sadness in that, only the odd tenderness of making something whose journey continues beyond your sight. When the settling is judged sufficient, the upper water is drained again. You help guide a cloth screen near the opening so that any floating bits catch before escaping or returning where they do not belong. The water runs away clearer than the morning liquor, and beneath it the blue paste waits, compact, patient and dark as a shaded well. The drain channel glistens, and small blue traces collect along its low places. A worker rinses them back when useful, because waste, even in small measure, is not welcome in a yard where so many hands have already given time. You scrape gently at a patch near the lip with the skimmer's edge, then wash it into the settling hollow, keeping the day's making together. The bottom paste is lifted with slow attention, and it feels heavier than its volume suggests, as if color itself had weight. It folds in thick ribbons from the scoop, breaking only when the mass has stretched as far as dampness permits. You hold the receiving cloth steady, and as the first load lands, the cloth sags with a soft blue heaviness that seems almost warm. Water begins to seep through, first in drops, then in a thin dark trickle that lightens as the paste firms. Beneath the cloth, a vessel catches the drainage, and someone watches to see whether valuable particles are escaping. The cloth's weave, the paste's fineness, and the pressure of hands all matter, and the work becomes as careful as straining milk, pressing curds, or drying fine clay. There is no rush in this stage, only repeated lifting, laying, folding, and waiting. The paste spreads, rests, thickens, and is gathered again. The cloth is adjusted, the corners are drawn, and more water leaves. Your palms become deeply stained, and when you flex them, the blue in the lines looks like a little map of the day's labor. The trader, still in the yard, may pick up a dry cake from a previous batch and break a small piece if the master allows it. He looks at the fracture, rubs it between thumb and finger, perhaps smells it, and judges the fineness, dryness, and strength in ways connected to his own experience. You see the broken edge only briefly, a dark interior under dusty outer bloom, and then your eyes return to the cloth. Judgment appears everywhere in this work, but each person judges a different moment. The farmer judges cutting time, the steeping worker judges readiness, the beater judges color and froth, the skimmer judges surface and impurity, the dryer judges firmness, and the trader judges the cake after all the wet labor has gone quiet inside it. A single blue lump holds many judgments, layered like sediments in a pond. As the paste firms, it is transferred to a flat place for shaping. The workers pinch off portions by feel, roll them between palms, press them, and set them down with enough space for air to move around each one. Some are slightly uneven, because hands are human, but the rows hold a pleasing order, like seeds laid out for counting, or loaves cooling after baking. You help carry a board into better shade, since the afternoon sun has shifted and one edge of the drying area has become too bright. The cakes must lose water, but not be punished by heat, and this balance requires someone to notice where light has moved. A mat is lowered, a basket is turned sideways as a windbreak, and the blue pieces continue their quiet drying. The trader leaves before evening, taking with him an agreement, a promise, or only an opinion, depending on how the talk concluded. His departure changes little in the yard, where the next batch still steeps and the tools still need rinsing. Commerce comes and goes like visitors at a gate, but water, leaves, and surfaces remain the daily company. You rinse the skimmer again, this time in water that has already seen so much blue it seems tired. The edge of the bowl catches a last bit of paste, and you remove it carefully with your thumb, returning it to the gathered mass rather than letting it wash away. There is respect in saving small amounts. Not greed exactly, but a sense that labor should not be allowed to vanish carelessly. The afternoon breeze carries some relief through the yard, though it also lifts dust from the road. Someone sprinkles water near the drying place to settle it, and the smell of damp earth rises cleanly beneath the stronger indigo odors. For a few breaths, the yard smells almost like the first rain on hot ground, and everyone feels the change without needing to speak. The steeping tank for tomorrow is checked once more, its stones still in place and its water darkening around submerged leaves. You lean over it and see only a dull surface, but beneath that surface the leaves are softening, giving, losing shape. By morning they will be different, and so will the water, and the day will take them up into the familiar work of change. A small repair is made to the plaster near one channel, where repeated draining has worn a rough patch. Wet lime or clay is smoothed into the hollow with fingers, and a flat stone presses it level so the next flow will not catch and carry grit. Industrial work, even when old and simple, depends on such repairs, because a craft is not only the main act, but all the tending that lets the main act continue. You carry away a basket of refuse leaves with another worker, the weight shared between you on a pole. The basket drips as you walk, leaving dark spots across the packed ground, and the smell grows stronger when the heap is disturbed. You tip it onto the refuse pile, and the leaves slide out slowly, no longer field plants, no longer dye plants, but part of a returning earth. At the washing place, someone scrubs a stave with a handful of fiber, removing slippery blue matter before it dries too firmly. The stave is long, plain, and worn where many palms have gripped it, its end rounded by striking water and plastered through repeated days. Like the skimmer, it is only a tool until work begins, and then it becomes a kind of remembered motion. Evening comes with the sound of animals being led home beyond the wall. Hooves pass, bells move, and a driver speaks in a low tone that does not rise above the yard's own small noises. The sky above the vat turns pale and then softer, and the drying cakes lose their last warm shine as shadows settle over blue. You wipe the rim of the beating vat one final time, clearing the places where scum has dried into a brittle line. The cloth comes away stained, and you fold it so the cleanest part remains outside for the next pass. Tomorrow it will be rinsed, stained again, wrung, hung, and used, because in this place even a cloth has a repeating life. The master closes the storage area where dried cakes are kept away from careless dampness. Inside, rows and baskets hold past days in a form that can be weighed, counted, and moved. Outside, the vats hold future days in the form of soaking leaves and empty basins, and you stand for a moment between what has been made and what is becoming ready. There is a tenderness in that middle place, though no one would name it loudly. A worker spends life among things changing from one state to another, leaf to liquor, liquor to sediment, sediment to paste, paste to cake, cake to trade, and trade to cloth. The skimmer's work touches only some of those changes, but enough to feel the world's quiet habit of becoming other. When you leave, the road is cooler than it was yesterday at this hour, and a faint breeze moves dust along the ruts. You pass a well where people still talk, a doorway where a lamp is being lit, and a courtyard where a loom rests silent after its own long day. The smell of indigo keeps close to you, soft and sour, like a second garment woven from work. At home, you wash again, and the basin water takes on a pale blue cast. A child may laugh at the stain on your fingers, or an older person may tell you not to waste water scrubbing what tomorrow will renew. You smile because they are right, and because some marks belong to the rhythm of earning bread, returning each day until they feel almost like belonging. Night settles over the houses, over the yard, over the fields, where the next cutting waits. The vats are out of sight now, but your mind can still picture them, round and low, with stones pressing leaves beneath dark water and tools hanging quietly in the cooling air. Nothing in the yard hurries while you sleep, yet everything is moving, softening, settling, loosening, becoming blue in the dark. By the time the first cock calls somewhere beyond the houses, the night's quiet work inside the steeping tank has already changed the leaves beyond recognition. They were once crisp enough to spring back under the hand, and now they lie softened under the stones, pressed into a dark mass that gives up its hidden matter to the waiting water. The yard receives you before full light, with the familiar dampness underfoot and the faint sharp odor that tells you the soaking has gone far enough. The first task is always to look before touching, because a vat can be disturbed before a careless hand has done much at all. You lean over the surface and see the faint skin that has formed around the edges, where tiny bubbles and bits of leaf cling to the plaster like a tide mark. The skimmer rests in your hand with its old balance, and you lower it slowly, clearing the rim before the stones are moved, and the day's larger motion begins. A worker beside you lifts the first stone with both hands, setting it down where water can drain from its underside. Then another stone rises, and another, each leaving the plant beneath to loosen and swell upward as though the tank were breathing out after holding its breath through the night. The leaves are no longer green in the way of fields, but dark, slick, tired, and giving, their color drawn into the liquor that waits beneath the mass. You skim the little rafts that break loose, and the bowl gathers stems, torn leaves, and the thin scum that the night has pushed to the surface. It is a gentle kind of cleaning, though it must be steady, because what floats now may travel into the lower vat if allowed to drift toward the channel. You lift, drain, and empty the skimmer, then return to the same place until the rim looks clear and the liquor can pass. When the outlet is opened, the steeped water begins to run, at first in a narrow thread, then in a fuller stream that glides along the shallow channel between the tanks. The sound is soft but purposeful, a low water voice in the cool morning yard, and everyone pauses just enough to see that the flow is clean. You follow it with your eyes, and then with your hands, catching fragments before they settle where the beaters will later stir them into trouble. The receiving vat below fills by degrees, its plastered interior darkening as the liquor rises. The workers who will beat it wait until the depth is right, their staves resting against their shoulders, their bare feet placed carefully on damp stone. They do not rush into the vat, because rushing is how a person slips, spills, or wastes effort that will be needed when the sun has climbed higher. At last they step down and take their positions, and the first strokes begin. The staves enter the liquor with a thick sound, pushing downward and then drawing back, and the water, having rested all night, begins to open itself to air. Foam gathers in pale patches, and you move around the rim, watching for the first heavy scum while the morning grows lighter around the walls. The rhythm of beating is close to breathing when heard from a little distance. A push, a lift, a splash, a turn, and then another. The same gestures passing from one man's body into the next until the vat seems to have many arms and one steady purpose. You skim where the current brings the froth toward you, careful not to take too much, because the blue that is forming still belongs in the water. There is a quality in this work that makes the mind settle after a time. You do not need to chase every thought because the surface itself gives enough to follow, and the hand repeats what it knows without demanding praise. The foam thickens, the liquor darkens, the skimmer drains, and in the space between one pass and the next, the world becomes small, wet, and orderly. Beyond the yard, the morning market may already be opening, with grain sellers measuring from baskets and potters setting out stacks of fired vessels. A cloth merchant might unfold a length of dyed cotton beneath his awning, shaking it once so the fabric catches the light and shows its depth of color. He may speak of blue as a finished thing, while you stand beside the vat, where blue is still a settling possibility. The Mughal towns are full of trades that depend on each other without always meeting face to face. The grower may never meet the dyer, the skimmer may never meet the weaver, the merchant may never know the name of the boy who held the cloth while paste drained from it. Yet each works inside the same wide net of usefulness, and the color passes through that net quietly, leaving traces on every hand. The master walks by the vat and watches the beating for a while, then glances at the foam you have gathered near the waste place. He says nothing, which is often the best sign, because in a yard like this, approval is usually found in the absence of correction. You continue skimming, and the skimmer's lip makes a soft, almost whispering sound as it enters the surface. A little later, when the froth rises more strongly, the older worker asks for oil, and you bring the small vessel from the shaded shelf. Its contents move slowly, shining dull gold in the early light, and only a modest amount is allowed to touch the vat. The oil spreads in thin circles, breaks under the staves, and calms the foam just enough for your bowl to pass more cleanly. It is easy to think of such a process as simple because the tools are plain. A vat, some water, leaves, staves, cloth, sun, and hands seem like ordinary things, and they are ordinary. But their order matters with a precision that comes from experience rather than ornament. The right leaf at the right time, the right soaking, the right beating, the right clearing of surface and settling of sediment, and the right drying can turn a green field into a blue that others will treasure. You know the work not as a list but as a day. It begins cool, grows wet and loud, becomes warm and watchful, then settles into cloth, paste, drying rows, rinsed tools, and the long walk home. The body remembers this order before the mind names it, and in that remembering there is a kind of comfort. By mid-morning, the vat has taken on a deeper tone, and the surface no longer looks like mere steeped plant water. The foam shows dull blue along its broken edges, and the splashes on the rim dry darker than before, leaving little signs of the change beneath. You lift one patch carefully and let the liquid run back, watching it fall in strands before the heaviest scum remains in the bowl. The beaters begin to tire, though they keep the rhythm because stopping too soon would leave the work unfinished. Their shoulders rise and fall, and the muscles along their backs shine with water and effort, while the staves churn the liquor from its lower depths. Another pair waits nearby, ready to take over, and the exchange happens with the quiet dignity of people who understand shared labor. When fresh men step in, the vat changes its sound only slightly. Each worker has his own weight, reach, and manner of pulling, yet the water receives all these differences and returns them as one broad movement. You adjust your skimming to the new current because the foam now gathers nearer the far side, where the staves push it toward a shadowed curve. The boy is with you again, carrying a basket and trying to keep his eyes on everything at once. He watches the beaters, the master, the foam, the oil vessel, the channel, and your skimmer, and in his eagerness he nearly steps on the damp cloth laid out for later use. You touch his arm lightly and guide him aside, because learning in a working yard often begins with knowing where not to put one's feet. He asks whether the blue is already there, and you tell him it is becoming there, which is not the same thing. The plant held something the water loosened, the beating brings air to it, and then the heavy color will fall, though the eye may want the answer faster than the vat gives it. He looks down again, perhaps puzzled, perhaps satisfied, and the foam continues gathering at the rim. There is kindness in letting a process remain a little mysterious while still explaining the useful part. Not every truth needs to be broken open at once, especially when the hands must spend years learning what the words only begin. You return the skimmer to the water, and the boy watches the angle of your wrist with more attention than before, because now he sees that even a quiet motion contains judgment. The morning becomes hot enough for the smell of the yard to thicken. It rises from the steeping tank, the beating vat, the refuse heap, the damp cloths, the workers' wet garments, and the plaster that has absorbed years of indigo making. To a passerby, it might be unpleasant, but to you, it is layered and readable, carrying signs of readiness, freshness, sourness, and the day's progress. Near the drying place, yesterday's cakes are turned once more. Their surfaces have firmed, and when lifted, they leave faint blue dust on the board, a dry whisper after so much water. The worker turning them has hands stained almost black in the creases, but his movements are light, and each cake is set down with a small space around it for air to pass through. Drying is quieter than skimming, yet it has its own watchfulness. The cakes cannot be forgotten simply because they no longer move, and a cloud crossing the sun, a sudden wind, or careless dust can change the quality of what has already taken so much effort. Someone must notice, and the yard is full of people noticing different things at the same time. As the beating slows toward its end, the master bends near the vat and looks down through the moving surface. His face gives little away, but his posture changes when the liquor has reached the state he wants, and the beaters understand before he says much. A few final strokes are made, more even than strong, and then the staves rise dripping into the warm air. The sudden lessening of sound feels almost large, though no one makes it dramatic. Water continues to move by itself, slapping softly against the plaster, then easing into smaller waves, then into faint tremors that pass across the surface and fade. You wait until the strongest motion has gone, because to skim too early would stir what is ready to settle. The settling hour has a different patience from the beating hour. During beating, a man can feel that his effort is doing something visible, while settling asks everyone to trust the quiet descent of particles through water. You stand at the edge, skimmer held low, and remove the last floating matter as though tidying a room where someone has just fallen asleep. The sun has crossed high enough that the shade has shifted, and a younger worker moves the matting near the drying cakes. He lifts one pole, sets it in a new hole, and the shadow falls more kindly across the rows. The cakes sit under it like small, dull stones, but their color deepens where a broken edge reveals the denser blue within the body. You sit briefly near the wall with your food, though your eyes remain with the vat. Bread, lentils, water, perhaps a bit of jaggery if the day has been generous, all taste stronger because your senses have been filled with fermenting leaves. A worker beside you eats in silence, and the two of you share the shade without needing to make conversation, which is sometimes the most companionable kind of rest. A fly moves over the rim of your cup, and you wave it away slowly. The yard sounds continue around you, not as interruption, but as part of the rest, because even a pause in labor is held inside labor's setting. You hear cloth being wrung, baskets shifted, someone clearing his throat, and the faint water sound of the settling vat doing its hidden work. After food, you return to the rim and see that the upper water has begun to clarify. The change is never complete all at once, but the eye can sense the layers forming, with lighter liquid above and heavier blue gathering below. You skim only where needed, touching the surface so gently that the water barely notices the tool. This is the part of the job that trains restraint. A person who wants to be useful too eagerly may do too much, stirring where he should wait, scraping where he should watch, or lifting what should remain. The vat teaches otherwise, because sometimes the best service is a light hand, a clear eye, and the willingness to let gravity carry the color downward. The master checks the drain after some time, and the opening is prepared for the upper water. A cloth is held near it, and the plug is loosened carefully so the water leaves without pulling the blue sediment too strongly. The first flow is watched closely, because its color says whether the settling has been sufficient, and whether the lower paste is holding its place. You stand inside the curve of the vat's work, though your feet remain on the rim, and the falling level reveals the stained wall ring by ring. Each ring is a day, or part of one, and some are so old they have become less stained than memory. The plaster smells wet where exposed, and the air inside the vat grows cooler as the water lowers toward the bottom. At last the blue paste appears, first as a dark blur, then as a soft mass resting in the lowest hollow. It is never quite the color people imagine when they say blue. Not yet, because wet indigo is deep, shadowed, and almost black in places. It needs air, draining, shaping, and drying before it becomes the familiar cake. And even then its strongest color may be revealed only when broken, rubbed, or dissolved for dyeing. The paste is scooped with care, and the first lift brings a sense of weight that always seems surprising. How can something that began as leaves and water become this dense blue mud, heavy enough to sag cloth and stain the hand through every small fold of skin? You help guide it into the straining cloth, and the fabric receives it with a soft downward pull. Water seeps, then trickles, then slows. The cloth darkens, the paste firms, and the blue residue along your fingers grows thicker each time you adjust an edge. You wipe nothing away until the movement is done, because wiping too often wastes both time and substance. And the day has already taught your hand where the useful matter belongs. The boy holds a corner again, less tightly than before. He looks at the way the cloth strains under the weight and adjusts his grip before you need to tell him. This small correction pleases you more than a spoken answer might, because the craft is entering his body now, little by little, through pressure, balance, dampness, and attention. The paste is set to rest, then moved to a shaping board when it has thickened enough. Palms press it into portions, rolling or patting each lump into the yard's customary form, not perfect, but regular enough for drying and trade. A row emerges slowly, one piece after another, and the board begins to look like a small blue harvest gathered from water. The work of shaping has a quiet domestic resemblance, like making small cakes of grain or pressing curds, though the stain on the hands tells another story. Fingers leave marks, edges are smoothed, and pieces are turned so that no side keeps too much wetness. Each one is placed with space to breathe, because even after shaping, indigo continues to change in the air. Late afternoon light falls across the drying place, slanting through dust and making every blue surface seem softer. The newer cakes are dark and damp, while the older ones have developed a pale bloom that almost hides their strength. A person unfamiliar with the dye might think the dusty surface meant weakness, but those who know indigo understand that quiet exteriors can carry deep color. There are small repairs to make before the day closes. A channel must be cleared of grit, a loose basket rim tied, a cloth rinsed before sourness settles too deeply into it, and one skimmer handle checked where the wrapping has begun to loosen. None of these tasks feels large, yet each prevents tomorrow from beginning with a small failure already waiting in the hand. You sit on your heels and bind the handle with a strip of worn cloth, pulling it tight and smoothing the end under your thumb. The cloth is stained already, so another stain will not matter, and its softness will keep the grip from rubbing when the next long skimming comes. A tool repaired in this plain way feels almost grateful, though of course the gratitude is only the worker's own relief. The yard's shadows lengthen until the vats seem deeper, even when empty. The steeping tank for tomorrow is filled and covered, its stones resting firmly over the fresh plant, and the lower beating vat has been rinsed enough for the night. Water stands in shallow places and reflects a narrow piece of sky, colored faintly by everything the day has made. The master's account book comes out again near the end of light. He notes what has been cut, steeped, beaten, settled, shaped, or set to dry, and perhaps he writes the count of cakes from a previous batch. His inked marks will help with trade and memory, but they cannot capture the feel of the skimmer's weight or the exact smell of a vat at readiness. You know those things because you were there with them. You were there when the first scum lifted, when the oil calmed the froth, when the upper water cleared, when the cloth sagged under new paste, and when the boy's hand relaxed around the corner. Such details may never enter a ledger, but they are the quiet interior of the craft, held by the people who repeat it. Before closing, you walk once around the drying place. The cakes are set safely, the shade is arranged, and the night air will begin its slower drying after the heat has gone. You do not touch them unless needed, but you look closely, because looking is part of care. And care is often the difference between a batch that keeps well and one that troubles later. A dog noses near the refuse heap and is gently shooed away. The heap itself steams faintly where the day's warmth remains trapped inside wet leaves, and its smell thickens as evening cools. In time, that matter will sink back into earth, and though no merchant will count it, the field knows how to receive what the vat has finished using. The first evening lamp is lit near the storage room, and its small flame catches the edge of a stacked basket. Dried cakes rest in the dimness, wrapped or arranged for safety, and their surfaces seem almost grey until a nearer light reveals the blue beneath. The color is quiet there, waiting without display, like a word held in the mouth before being spoken. You rinse the skimmer one last time, then hang it where your hand will find it in the morning. The peg is worn smooth from years of taking and returning, and the tool settles against the wall with a small wooden sound. Such sounds mark the end of work more honestly than any formal closing, because a day is done when the tools are where they belong. The gate opens, and the cooler road receives your feet. Behind you, the yard keeps its damp stones, its drying cakes, its covered tank. It stains its ledges, its quiet piles of leaves, and the faint blue water drying in shallow marks near the channels. Ahead, the houses gather evening around themselves, and you carry the day between them, like a scent woven into your clothes. A neighbor passing may ask whether the blue was good, and you answer that it was steady. That word is enough, because steady means the leaves gave properly, the vat behaved, the foam could be managed, and the paste settled with a satisfying weight. It means the day did not need drama to be successful, only attention repeated until the work came through. When darkness reaches the lane, the world seems to narrow to small household sounds, a ladle against a pot, a low voice, a child's sleep-heavy complaint, the shuffle of someone spreading a mat, and beyond all of it the distant quiet where the indigo yard has closed itself for the night. You lie down with the smell of leaves still near your hair, and the body, having followed water all day, follows sleep just as gently. In sleep, perhaps the vat returns, but softened, with its surface calm and no urgent task waiting at the rim. The skimmer moves by itself through dream water, lifting only moonlit foam, while the blue below settles endlessly and never needs to be drained. The yard becomes larger and quieter than any waking yard, and the night carries you through its cool basins. Morning will come again, because morning always comes to work that depends on soaking leaves. Before voices rise, the covered tank will have darkened, the stones will be slick, and the water will hold another hidden color ready for air. Your hand will close around the skimmer, and the same old movement will begin, familiar enough to feel almost like breathing. This is how a life can be measured without grand dates, by vats skimmed, cloths rinsed, cakes dried, seasons cut, monsoons watched, and roads made passable or muddy. A person might remember one year because the leaves were thick, another because the heat came early, another because a trader praised a batch made after unexpected rain. The larger world may speak in rains and campaigns, but the yard speaks in water levels, drying times, and stains. And there, inside that quieter record, the vat skimmer's work holds its place. It is neither the beginning nor the end of indigo, but it is the careful middle, where impurity is lifted away and the hidden color is allowed to gather. The hands do not command the blue. They make room for it, clearing the surface, waiting through stillness, and trusting the descent that turns leaf water into dye. On some mornings, mist lies low beyond the yard, softening the line between field and path. The bundles arriving from the fields seem to emerge from the pale air one by one, carried on heads or carts, their leaves damp from dew and their cut ends fresh. The smell of them is cleaner than the vat, closer to living green, and for a moment the yard holds both the plant's beginning and its ending. Those misty mornings make the first work cooler on the skin. The stones are damp, the plaster underfoot is slick, and your breath shows faintly only if the season has leaned toward coolness, though the day will warm soon enough. You take care stepping near the tanks, because a working yard in morning damp asks for slower feet and an even slower mind. The plants are laid in the steeping tank, spread, pressed, and covered with water. As always, they resist sinking at first, buoyant and stubborn, until stones persuade them to remain below the surface. The water closes over them, and the green smell rises once, fresh and almost bright, before the tank settles into the long, quiet business of soaking. Nearby, a previous steeping is ready to move, because the yard overlaps its labors, so no day holds only one stage. Fresh leaves sink in one tank, while steeped liquor runs from another, cakes dry from yesterday while paste drains from this morning, and tools from all stages pass through rinse water that turns steadily blue. To a newcomer, it may seem tangled, but to you, the overlapping order feels natural, like several threads moving across the same loom. You find your place where the channel begins, and as the liquor runs, you skim the first lifted scraps. The water carries a smell that tells of the night's work, stronger than fresh leaves, softer than rot, and touched with the warmth held by plaster and stone. It passes below, into the beating vat, where men are already preparing their staves and adjusting their stance for the rhythm ahead. The day will repeat, but repetition does not make it empty. A different crop, a slightly warmer night, a new worker in the vat, a cloud passing during drying, a cloth woven tighter than usual, or a faint crack in one cake can alter the feel of everything. The shape of the work remains the same, and within that sameness each day offers its modest variation. There is a peace in knowing the order before it comes. First the clearing, then the flow, then the beating, then the foam, then the oil if needed, then the stillness, the draining, the paste, the cloth, the shaping, the drying, and the tools returned. The mind can rest inside this order, not because it is dull, but because it is reliable. A set of steps wide enough for thought to wander. Sometimes that wandering goes back to the fields. You remember the indigo plants in rows, leaves flickering under the wind, with soil cracked in dry weather or soft around the ankles after rain. The cutters bend and straighten, their sickles low, and the bundles gather in heaps that look plain until one knows what they carry. The field is quiet in another way, open to sky rather than enclosed by walls, yet it belongs to the same blue. Other times your mind follows the cakes after they leave. Wrapped in cloth or packed in baskets, they may go by cart to a market town, then by another road or river, handled by men who test weight and dryness, with fingers trained differently from yours. Perhaps they will be stored in a warehouse where spices, cotton, salt, and metal share the air, and there the indigo will keep its silence among other goods. A dyer who buys it later may break a piece and grind or soak it, coaxing the color back toward liquid so cloth can take it. Cotton thread lowered into a prepared vat may emerge greenish at first, then turn blue in the air, just as your liquor changed when beaten open. The same patient meeting with air returns, and though you are not there to see it, the process carries a familiar echo. Such thoughts come and go while the skimmer works. They do not lift you out of the yard, because the surface still needs watching, but they let the mind drift along the larger river of the craft. Your hand remains near, your eye remains steady, and the blue continues its slow making under the ordinary sun. The morning's beating begins in earnest, and the vat grows lively once more. Staves churn, water folds, foam gathers, and the men's feet grip the slick floor as they work through the resistance. You move with the rim, taking what should be taken, leaving what should remain, and the skimmer's repeated arc becomes the quiet signature of your role. There are no applause sounds in such work, no formal praise when the surface clears. The reward is more modest. A cleaner vat, a smoother settling, a good paste, cakes that dry properly, and perhaps a nod from someone who has seen enough to know. This kind of satisfaction does not flare. It stays low and warm, like embers kept for the next fire. By afternoon, when the paste from the settling vat is spread in cloth, the sun has burned away the morning mist completely. The yard smells warmer, and the damp places near the channels have begun to crust at the edges. You kneel by the cloth, pressing lightly, and see blue water bead and fall from the weave, drop by drop, into the waiting vessel. The paste slowly changes under your hands. What was once flowing becomes holdable. What was holdable becomes shapeable, and what is shaped will become dry enough to travel. There is a gentle lesson in that, though you do not need to state it aloud, because work often teaches by passing through the hands before it reaches the tongue. When the cakes are formed, they are laid near the older ones, and the difference between them shows the passage of time. New cakes are dark, soft, and shiny in patches. Older cakes are dull, firm, and powder-blued. The driest ones have an almost dusty dignity, waiting for packing. A whole calendar of the yard lies there in rows, yesterday beside today, today beside what will be ready tomorrow. The boy asks whether a cake can be too dry, and the older worker answers that almost anything can be too much of what it needs. Too much water, too much sun, too much beating, too much delay, too much pressure, and even too much care in the wrong place can change the result. The boy looks serious at this, and you smile slightly, because every craft eventually teaches moderation in its own language. Toward evening, a small breeze moves through and cools the wet cloths. They sway from a rope near the wall, all of them stained in different strengths of blue, as though the sky had been folded and washed there many times. The breeze brings a little relief to your face, and for a moment the yard seems less like a place of labor and more like a place of resting color. You clean the skimmer, the stave ends are rinsed, the channels are cleared, and the refuse leaves are carried to their heap. The motions are familiar enough that conversation can return, low and scattered, touching household matters, grain prices, a sick animal, a wedding, a debt, and the likelihood of rain. Life enters the yard in these small topics, weaving itself through dye work without disturbing the routine. A worker laughs softly at something said near the trough, and the laugh fades quickly into evening sounds. There is warmth in it, not loudness, because people who have worked in heat all day do not always spend extra strength on speech. The vats, cooling now, seem to receive the quiet around them, their plastered curves holding shadow like deep bowls. The final check of the steeping tank is made before departure. Stones sit firmly. The water has taken the first faint tint, and no bundle has risen where it might dry above the surface. You press one edge down with a pole and watch bubbles rise in a cluster, break softly, and leave the top smooth again. The tank is ready for night. At the gate, you pause briefly and look back. The drying cakes are covered or shaded as needed, the tools hang, the account book is closed, and the workers leave in twos and threes, each carrying some part of the yard away in smell, stain, and tiredness. The place does not become empty all at once. It empties gradually, like a vat, draining without sound. The road is dim, and the day's heat rises from it in the last faint breath of warmth. Above, the sky deepens slowly, and the first stars appear with the same patience that blue appeared in the vat. You walk home with your hands relaxed at your sides, palms still marked, steps even, mind unhurried, and behind you the cupboard leaves begin their long, quiet giving again. At home, the evening does not erase the yard, but softens it, turning the sour green smell into something faint on the edge of your sleeves. The basin water cools your wrists, and when you rub your hands, pale threads of blue drift away, though the deeper stain remains in the lines near the nails. You do not scrub too hard, because the skin has worked enough, and tomorrow will put the color back where it has always liked to settle. The household lamp burns with a small, steady flame, and its light finds the blue in your fingers when you lift a cup or tear bread. No one in the room needs to ask where you have been, because the work announces itself quietly, not with pride, but with the plain evidence of a day spent near Vats. Outside, the lane grows dim, and the last voices pass like soft footsteps beyond the wall, while the body loosens itself from labor. Sleep comes with the memory of water. It comes with the rhythm of the skimmer, the lift and drain, the turn of the wrist, the wet sound of foam leaving the surface and slipping into the bowl. Even as your eyes close, the mind may return to the vat's rim, but now the work is gentler than work, made of images without weight, a dark surface, a clear edge, a blue that falls. Before dawn, the yard has already begun again without you. Under the stones, the leaves continue releasing their hidden matter, and the water changes in darkness, carrying what the plant has yielded into itself. The covered tank lies under the cooling sky, and the tools hang in their places, waiting with the kind of patience that belongs to wood, metal, plaster, and cloth. When you arrive, the air is still and close, with a softness that suggests heat will come later. The eastern sky is pale, but the sun has not yet touched the tops of the walls, and the vats remain in a grey half-light that makes every surface look deeper. You take the skimmer down, feeling the repaired wrapping beneath your fingers, and its familiar weight returns you to the day. This morning, the steeping liquor smells a little stronger than yesterday, not spoiled, but fuller, as though the warm night has drawn more from the leaves. The master notices it too, and he bends longer over the tank, watching the colour as he lifts a small amount and lets it fall back. He says the soaking has gone far enough, and the workers begin lifting stones from the plant mass, each movement careful, wet, and slow. The leaves rise in clumps, dark and heavy, no longer holding the form they had when brought from the field. Their stems have softened, their little leaflets cling together, and when disturbed, they release a stronger breath into the morning air. You skim the loosened pieces quickly but lightly, keeping the tank's surface clear, while the others prepare the channel and the lower vat waits. The first flow runs thick with colour, not blue yet, but yellow-green and clouded, full of what the night has made possible. It slips down the channel with a steady sound, and your skimmer gathers stray fragments at the opening before they can travel with it. The lower vat receives the stream, and as the level rises, the plastered bowl seems to wake from its cool emptiness. The beaters stand ready, their staves upright, their garments tied, their feet knowing the places where the floor can be trusted. When they step in, the liquor touches their calves with the warmth of water that has held plant life through the night. They set their staves and begin, and the vat, quiet a moment before, becomes a moving body of folds, splashes, foam, and air. This batch asks for more skimming early on, because the plant matter has broken down finely and floats in little soft flecks along the current. You work more steadily, circling the rim in a measured pace, lifting scum before it thickens into stubborn islands. The skimmer's bowl fills, drains, empties, returns, and the movement becomes so regular that your breathing settles itself to the arc. The sun reaches the wall and lays a pale strip of light across the vat. In that light, the foam looks almost golden at first, then duller, then faintly touched by the blue that is beginning to gather beneath it. A younger worker might expect the color to arrive like dye poured into water, but you know it comes more like morning itself, by degrees that are visible only when one has learned to wait. The older beater, whose shoulders have carried many seasons of this work, slows for a moment and studies the resistance in his stave. He feels the liquor thicken slightly, or perhaps only change in the way it pushes back, and he nods to the men beside him. Their rhythm deepens, not faster, but more complete, drawing water up from the bottom and opening it to the air with each long pull. You skim where the foam collects near the brighter side, then move to the shadowed edge, where a line of scum has formed against the plaster. The difference between good froth and troublesome froth is not always clear to the eye of someone new, but your hand has learned the weight of what should be removed. Thin bubbles break and return, heavy clots lift and stay, and the skimmer tells you through the wrist what the eye only partly knows. Someone brings oil, but the older worker waits before adding it, because the foam may yet settle under the beating alone. Restraint saves the vat from unnecessary correction, and in this place, small additions are respected precisely because they are small. At last he adds only a little, and the surface relaxes, the thick froth loosening into broader patches that your skimmer can gather without disturbing the liquor. A smell rises then that belongs only to this middle hour when steeped plant water has met air and warmth and effort. It is sour, green, and slightly dusty, with a hidden mineral note from the vats, and once it has entered a person's memory, it can return years later without warning. You do not think of years as you work, yet the smell itself carries them, layered quietly into the present. Near the gate a cart has arrived with more cut plants, and the bullock stands patient in the shade while men unload the bundles. The fresh leaves bring a cleaner scent into the yard, briefly balancing the stronger odors of beating, refuse and draining cloth. For a moment, the whole life of Indigo seems gathered in one place. Fresh green at the gate, fermenting liquor in the vat, and drying blue cakes near the wall. The cart driver wipes dust from his forehead and watches the beating for a while, perhaps glad that his part of the labor is done for the moment. He knows the road, the harness, the slow patience of animals, and the way a load shifts when the wheel sinks into a rut. You know the rim, the surface, the foam, and the timing of a lift, and both kinds of knowing meet in the same yard. By late morning, the beaters are changed, and fresh arms take up the staves. The men climbing out move carefully, because the wet floor and the film of plant matter can make a foot betray its owner, without warning. They rinse at the side trough, laughing softly at some small comment, while the new pair begins with a strength that makes the surface rise and fold again. The boy has become bolder now, though not careless, and he brings the wastebasket before you ask. He sets it where your hand can empty the skimmer without turning too far, and then he steps back to watch the surface. Small acts like this show that a craft is entering him not as pride, but as usefulness, which is often the first real form of belonging. You let him skim one small patch near the rim where the foam is light and the current slow. His wrist dips too deeply at first, and the bowl takes too much liquor, but he corrects himself before you speak, tilting the lip so the liquid drains back. The scum remains, the good water returns, and his face settles into quiet concentration rather than excitement, which is a promising sign. The work continues through heat. Sweat runs down backs and disappears into wet garments. Dust clings to damp skin. The plaster rim grows warm under the hand. You drink when you can, eat when the vat allows, and keep your movements slow enough to last until evening, because a day spent too quickly in the morning becomes a harder day by noon. At the rest, you sit near the drying cakes and notice how their surfaces have changed since dawn. The newest ones still shine faintly in the folds, while the older ones have a powdery skin that lightens toward grey at the edges. A few are turned, not all, because the hand must judge each piece by touch, weight, and firmness, rather than by a general rule applied without care. You take a piece of bread and eat beside the wall, where the shade is narrow but sufficient. The yard remains active around you, though less loudly now, and the settling vat, recently beaten, grows calm enough that its surface reflects a broken shape of sky. Between bites you look at it, and the upper liquor begins to clear, just enough to show that the blue is descending properly. The settling after a strong beating always feels like a lesson in quietness. All morning the men have worked with arms, staves, breath, and splashing water, and now the most valuable part of the process happens by falling slowly and without visible effort. You can help only by not troubling it, by clearing the last floating matter, and then allowing the vat to do what gravity asks of it. A merchant's assistant comes in the afternoon with a folded cloth around a sample cake from another yard. The master examines it politely, breaking a little edge, rubbing the powder and speaking in low phrases that compare texture without insulting anyone. You hear only fragments while you skim, enough to understand that indigo is not one thing everywhere, but many small qualities gathered under a single name. Some cakes are strong but coarse, some fine but light, some too damp, some over-dried, some honest in color, and some mixed with too much earth or careless matter. Buyers know this, sellers know it, and workers know that poor handling at any stage can follow a cake all the way to market. The skimmer's task is humble, yet a fleck left here, a scum ignored there, can become part of what someone later judges with a finger. When the vat is ready to drain, the afternoon has grown quieter. The men move with less speech, and even the visitor steps aside, giving space to the work that must not be interrupted. The plug is loosened, the upper water begins to leave, and you stand close with cloth and skimmer, keeping the last disturbances from carrying away the fine blue that has settled below. The waterline lowers, and the stained wall appears again in rings. There is something restful about those rings, because they show that the vat has held many days, and released them one by one, without needing to remember them as stories. The fresh wet band darkens the plaster, the older bands remain faintly visible beneath it, and the whole inner curve seems marked by time. The paste at the bottom is especially rich today, thick and smooth, with fewer gritty flecks than some batches. The master notices, and the workers handling it take particular care, scraping the hollow clean without dragging in loose plaster from the sides. You hold the cloth steady, and the first heavy scoop lands with a soft weight, dark blue and almost shining where the light reaches in. As water seeps through the cloth, the paste tightens slowly. The cloth bulges and sags, and you lift one corner, then another, adjusting the pressure, so drainage remains even. The boy watches closely, and when you ask him to fetch another cloth, he chooses one with a tighter weave, having already understood that today's finer paste deserves a better holding. This is how knowledge passes, not only by command, but by the memory of what was chosen and why. A person sees a finer paste, remembers a tighter cloth, feels the difference in the hand, and years later makes the choice without needing to call it learning. In such ways, a yard becomes an archive of gestures, stored in bodies rather than in books. The paste rests for a while, covered likely to keep dust away while water continues to leave it. Around it, the yard moves into the closing tasks of afternoon, and each person seems to know which corner needs attention. Someone rinses staves, someone clears channels, someone checks the fresh steeping, someone shifts drying rows, and you clean the skimmer before returning to help shape the cakes. Today the cakes form well. The paste holds together without slumping, and the palms can smooth it into shape with fewer corrections. You press gently, roll, flatten where needed, and set each piece down in the row, leaving enough space for air and enough order for counting later. The fresh cakes look almost black in the shade, but where one edge catches sun, the blue glows through like deep water under stone. The assistant with the sample cake watches this shaping, perhaps seeing for the first time how much wet labor lies behind a dry piece in a trader's hand. He says little, and his silence feels appropriate, because the work is better understood by watching than by asking too many questions. The master allows the moment, then guides him back toward the storage area where older cakes can be discussed in more practical terms. You remain near the fresh row, smoothing a cracked edge before it dries that way. A crack in a cake is not the end of the world, but each small flaw invites another, and care taken early prevents care demanded later. Your thumb moves along the side, damp blue gathering at the nail, and the surface closes softly under pressure. In the later afternoon, clouds build far beyond the fields, not dark enough for rain yet, but high and pale along the horizon. Everyone notices them in the quiet way workers notice weather, because drying, cutting, soaking, and travel all answer to the sky. A little rain might settle dust and cool the world, while too much at the wrong hour could trouble cakes, roads, and harvested bundles. The mats are checked, the drying boards prepared to move if needed, and the newest cakes are placed where they can be protected quickly. No one speaks of worry, because the clouds may pass, but readiness is easier than repair. The yard's pace does not quicken, it simply becomes more attentive, with one eye on work and one eye on weather. A faint breeze reaches the vats before the clouds do. It touches the wet cloths, passes over the settling water in a shallow tank, and lifts the smell of fresh leaves from the new bundles by the gate. The air feels different on the skin, and for a moment even the tired workers seem to breathe more deeply, receiving the change as a small gift. The covered steeping tank is opened briefly to press down a bundle that has risen near one side. You guide it with a pole, easing it under the stone rather than forcing it, and bubbles rise in a slow cluster from between the leaves. The surface closes again, and the tank returns to its night work, though the sun has not yet fully left. The clouds pass north without rain, leaving only a softer evening light behind them. The drying cakes remain uncovered but shaded, and the workers relax the small readiness they had carried for an hour. Such weather watching is part of the craft as much as skimming, because a dye yard is open to the world even when its walls make it seem contained. Near closing, the master weighs a few dried cakes from an older batch, on a balance that has seen years of use. The pans hang from cords, the weights sit dark and handled, and the scale settles slowly before he makes his mark in the account book. Numbers matter here, but they come after water, leaves, air, and time have done their quieter counting. The clerk writes with careful strokes, dipping his pen and pausing to avoid a blot. His hands are cleaner than yours, though one blue fingerprint marks the edge of the page where someone passed too close earlier in the day. Even the book cannot remain untouched by the yard, and that faint print seems fitting, a small witness beside the written measure. You clean the skimmer more thoroughly tonight, because the batch was rich, and the bowl's inner edge has gathered a stubborn blue film. At the trough you rub it with fibre, rinse, rub again, and watch the water cloud darkly before clearing just a little. The tool grows smooth beneath your hand, ready for the next surface. the next foam, the next small decision of removal. The boy helps carry the waste matter away, walking more evenly than he did a few days before. He knows now how the basket drips, how to hold the pole so the weight does not swing, and where to step to avoid the slick patch near the trough. Nothing ceremonial marks this learning, yet the body has begun to understand the yard's map. The refuse heap receives another day's leaves. Steam lifts faintly from the inner warmth, and the smell is strong but not surprising, because the heap is the other side of the blue cake, the part that does not travel or shine. Every craft makes both product and remainder, and wisdom is partly knowing how to live calmly among both. Evening settles again. The vats darken, the tools hang, the drying rows are checked, and the fresh steeping lies under stones with tomorrow inside it. A lamp is lit near the storage room, and for a moment the flame catches the edges of the older cakes, revealing their dusty blue in a brief, quiet glow. You stand near the gate before leaving, not to admire anything grand, but because the body often pauses where the day changes into night. The yard looks smaller in evening, yet also deeper, full of hidden continuations, with leaves soaking, cakes drying, stains darkening, and water cooling under the open sky. You breathe once, taking in the sour green smell and the damp stone air, then step out onto the road. The road carries homeward through the same familiar dust, past courtyards, wells, animals, and cooking fires that lift smoke into the softening dark. Your hands swing at your sides, still faintly damp from washing, still marked in blue where no evening water can reach. Behind you, the indigo yard settles into its own sleep, and beneath the stones, the next color loosens itself from the leaves, patiently, silently, and slowly.